1997 was a year filled with good music and great movies, but also with inexplicable phenomena, unsolved crimes, and mysterious disappearances. But more importantly, it was the year you were born. Yes, you. Or at least, that is what YouTube data tells us about a large part of our audience. But don't worry, if you weren't born in this year, we are planning to bring more videos like this one about other interesting years. Comment which one you would like to see next. So, get comfortable and turn off the lights, because these are 7 unsolved mysteries of 1997. How are you doing? Good morning, afternoon, or evening. I greet you. Let's begin. The Phoenix Lights. Let's start by traveling to the night of the 13th of March, 1997, when thousands of inhabitants of Arizona and neighboring states were left stunned by a spectacle in the sky that was, as reported, as fascinating as it was unsettling. Around 7:30 p.m., several people began reporting a series of luminous objects crossing the sky, from Nevada passing through Phoenix, Arizona, and even reaching parts of the state of Sonora, in northern Mexico. In a span of approximately 3 hours, numerous witnesses from different cities described having seen these bright lights, shaped like a V and moving silently across the sky. It was one of the most spectacular mass UFO sightings and could be observed over a distance of about 480 kilometers. There were actually 2 distinct events that night. First, the large, triangular formation of lights moving from northwest to southeast over Arizona, and later, closer to 10:00 p.m., several fixed lights suspended over the Phoenix area were reported. Regarding the triangular formation, many said they appeared to be part of a much larger object, shaped like a triangle, or a kind of boomerang, which blocked the stars in its path, suggesting a solid structure of great size. Military authorities were quick to provide an explanation for the second group of lights, those that were static over Phoenix. According to the United States Air Force, those lights were high-intensity flares dropped by a 10 Warthog aircraft during an exercise at the Barry Goldwater training base in southwestern Arizona. However, for the sighting of the immense V-shaped formation that crossed the state hours earlier, there was no official explanation. In fact, the then governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, was a direct witness to that supposed huge silent craft. And although he initially treated the matter with humor, he even held a press conference shortly after the incident, where he joked about having found those responsible for the phenomenon while showing one of the attendees dressed as an extraterrestrial years later. He publicly acknowledged that what he saw had seemed like something from another world. Tens of thousands of citizens, both in the United States and Mexico, claimed to have seen the lights that night. There were also testimonies from some civilian pilots, including the renowned actor Kurt Russell, who revealed years later that he was flying that night and reported a UFO in a triangular formation to the control tower. From that night, home videos, photographs, and countless 911 recordings of scared people reporting something inexplicable in the sky remain. To this day, the Phoenix Lights officially remain without a convincing explanation. Many believe it could have been some experimental military aircraft. Others attribute it directly to beings from other worlds. The only thing certain is that this case became a benchmark for world ufology and one of the greatest mysteries of 1997. The disappearance of Bruno Gentiletti. 11 days before those mysterious lights invaded the Phoenix sky, on the afternoon of Sunday, the 2nd of March 1997, an entire family saw their day of rest cut short by an event that would turn into one of the most mysterious cases of disappearance in Argentina. That day, Marisa Olguin and Claudio Gentiletti, along with their 5 children, were traveling from their town, Las Rosas, in the province of Santa Fe, to the La Florida resort, a popular beach on the banks of the Paraná River in the city of Rosario. It was the end of summer vacation, and the family plan was very simple: enjoy a few hours of sun and water before school started. Bruno Alberto Gentiletti, 8 years old, arrived at the beach with his parents, ready for an afternoon of fun. Unfortunately, just half an hour later, he would vanish without a trace. Bruno's disappearance occurred in a matter of minutes, and in broad daylight. According to the reconstruction of events and testimony from his own siblings, upon arriving at the beach, Bruno was worried about how murky the water was. He had suffered an ear infection and did not plan to go into the water because that day he did not have his earplugs, which he usually used to swim. So, while his father and 2 of his older brothers went to swim, Bruno stayed in the children's play area with his younger siblings, Gisela, 5, and Franco 7. In that area, there were slides and trampolines, among other things. One of the slides was closed, and according to his siblings' testimony, Bruno stayed near that slide, curious, while Gisela and Franco ran back to the umbrella where their mother was preparing lunch. Just a few minutes later, when Marisa called them to eat, she noticed Bruno was not there. After asking about him, her 2 children told her he was at the slide. She looked up, but her son was nowhere to be found. From that moment, a frantic search was unleashed. Barely 30 minutes had passed since the family's arrival, and they were already facing any parent's worst nightmare. The security team was alerted immediately. Announcements were made over loudspeakers. Dozens of people collaborated by scouring the beach on foot and searching in the water. The initial concern was that the child might have suffered an accident after falling into the water. Several divers raked and searched tirelessly at the bottom. Simultaneously, the police initiated an operation on land. The exits of the resort were closed. Vehicles were checked, as were trash containers, restrooms, and every corner where a child could be hidden or held. They even ordered the sand to be moved with shovels to rule out that he had suffered a fall and been covered up, but nothing yielded results. Bruno Alberto Gentiletti seemed to have evaporated into thin air in an instant, amidst hundreds of visitors and without anyone noticing anything strange. As the days went by, the search expanded to the entire province, and even across borders. Bruno's disappearance caused a national commotion. Support from civil organizations like Missing Children Argentina was activated, and the child's photo circulated in media across the country. Security forces received countless reports and alleged tips of supposed sightings. It was said he had been seen wandering in neighboring cities, or that he might have been taken to another province. But not a single piece of conclusive evidence was ever found. Initially, the parents themselves were investigated as a matter of protocol, ruling out any connection to the incident. The possibility of an extortion kidnapping or one for revenge was considered, given that one of Bruno's uncles had had problems with drug trafficking, but no solid evidence was found to support this hypothesis. Countless rumors of child trafficking networks circulated, and even some psychics offered supposed visions that led to fruitless operations. A man named Mohammed, a homeless man with mental health issues who loitered in the area, was detained under suspicion of having taken the child, but there was nothing linking him to the act, and he was released shortly after. The case hit a dead end, but his family never stopped looking for him. His parents have kept the hope and the dissemination of his case alive year after year. Upon the 25th and later 28th anniversary of his absence, the authorities renewed the reward, which currently stands at around 5 million pesos for anyone providing information leading to his whereabouts. Additionally, a projection of what his face would look like today is periodically released, as Bruno would be around 36 years old today. Almost 3 decades have passed since his disappearance, and nothing is known about him. Only that he was a happy boy who was curious and playing near a closed slide. The end of the Order of the Solar Temple. It seems March was a particularly chaotic month in 1997, because 21 days after Bruno's disappearance, and only 10 days after the Phoenix Lights, what I am about to tell you happened. It was the 23rd of March 1997, when the Quebec police in Canada made a macabre discovery in a quiet rural town called St. Casimir. Among the charred remains of a house, they found the lifeless bodies of 5 adults, 3 women, and 2 men. Their bodies were arranged in a circle, and there was evidence that the fire had been set intentionally. It soon became known that those people were members of the sect known as the Order of the Solar Temple. This order was an esoteric sect of French-Swiss origin, founded in 1984 by Joseph de Mombro and Luc Jouret. It combined elements of Christianity with the New Age movement and references to the medieval Templars. Their doctrine mixed apocalyptic beliefs with secret initiation rituals. The group had gained international notoriety for a series of mass suicides that occurred in the 90s. In 1994, in Switzerland and Canada, 53 members died in what was described as a collective ritual. Many were found in specific positions, but some presented signs of strangulation, which suggested that not all members had been in agreement about taking their own lives. In 1995, in France, 16 more people died in very similar circumstances. Among the victims of both events were minors and even a baby just 3 months old. The order maintained that the end of the world was near, and that by voluntarily abandoning the physical body, their souls could travel to a higher level of existence on a planet orbiting the star Sirius. For them, this ritual through the sacred fire was not an end, but a means to transit to the next cosmic stage. Among the victims of 1,994 were the founders of this sect. After the loss of their leaders, it was believed that the group had dissolved, or at least that such a tragedy would not happen again. The Quebec authorities had even intervened and severely restricted their activities. However, a small group of followers remained active in hiding, and, returning to 1,997, among the bodies were found propane gas tanks and fire accelerants. Additionally, a document was found in which the adherents indicated they were ready to leave for their final destination. The 5 victims were identified as Didier and Chantal Keys, a French couple. Also present were Suzanne D., mother of Chantal and mother-in-law of Didier. Another of the victims was Pauline R., and the last member was Bruno K., a man of Swiss origin. A chilling detail was that in a nearby house, 3 teenagers were found alive, although dazed by the use of drugs. These were the children of the couple. According to what they later related, their parents tried to include them in this suicide, but during the first failed attempt, the young people confronted the adults and begged for their lives. Surprisingly, the parents relented and allowed them to leave, but not without first drugging them, perhaps with the hope that they would die painlessly from smoke inhalation. The 3 teenagers escaped the blaze and later identified the bodies of their parents among the rubble. According to forensics, the victims connected gas tanks to electric heaters to provoke the fire and then placed themselves in their positions. 4 of them died from smoke inhalation, and 1 was asphyxiated. It is likely that he hesitated at the last moment. This ritual marked the end of the history of the Order of the Solar Temple. In total, between 1994 and 1997, 74 people linked to the sect died in these suicides and collective murders. The mystery, in this case, does not lie in who perpetrated it or their motivations, but in the complexity of the power of a sect, in how a couple of people with ideas that to most might seem like simple nonsense can lead so many people to wish to take their lives, waiting for a greater good. If you are enjoying this content, we remind you that we have much more on our other channels, such as Octambulo's podcast, where we talk about paranormal cases and true crime, like a conversation between friends. We also have the Historias de Mundo Creepy channel, where we tell the stories that you send to our email, completely real stories from the audience. There is also Creepy Pastas de Mundo Creepy, where we tell you stories written by us, like in the beginnings of this channel. All this on YouTube and all the audio platforms where you might be. Thank you very much. The Galway Poltergeist. That same spring, thousands of kilometers away, a humble family in Galway, Ireland, lived an experience worthy of a horror movie, which was widely covered and documented by local media. The events occurred in the home of the Fayan family, located in the modest neighborhood of Corrib Park, where Jackie and Esther Fayan had been living peacefully in the same house for more than 30 years. At that moment, they shared the home with their daughter Martha and their infant granddaughter, Sarah Louise. Staying temporarily in the family home was also their son Michael and his fiancée, Mary. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary in their lives, at least until from one moment to the next, they began to witness strange phenomena that disturbed their lives. The first thing they noticed was a foul, intermittent odor that invaded different corners of the house for no apparent reason. It was a stench described as a mixture of rotting meat and urine that appeared and disappeared without them being able to locate its source. Concerned, the Fayans inspected pipes, drains, and every nook and cranny of the house. They even called municipal authorities to check the sanitary facilities, but everything was in order. After a few weeks, that nauseating odor faded almost as mysteriously as it had arrived. The family believed the bad patch had passed, but they were wrong. That would only be the beginning. One night, Michael and his fiancée Mary woke up startled. There was an intense white light flooding their bedroom in the middle of the night. It was as if a powerful spotlight were shining from outside, but when they peered out the window, the light disappeared, and they saw nothing that could produce it. Days later, while Michael and Mary had gone on a trip for a few days, Esther, the mother, went to clean the young couple's room and found on the carpeted floor what she initially thought were remains of peeling paint. But upon checking it, she realized they were eggshells, even though nobody had been cooking eggs there. Esther, disconcerted, cleaned everything up, but when the couple returned, they found that there were fragments of eggshell on the floor of their room, as if they had appeared again out of nowhere. No one knew the origin of these shells. In the following days, more pieces of shells began to appear, and not only in the bedroom, but in the living room and kitchen. At the same time, the family began to hear nocturnal noises like footsteps and knocks late at night. Initially, the Fayans tried to look for logical explanations, but the situation quickly escalated to something that could not be explained. One night after another, there were knocks on the walls of the room of little Sarah Louise, the baby of the house, and sometimes a baby's crying could be heard coming from there, when the girl was actually sleeping peacefully. On one occasion, Martha, the baby's mother, had tucked Sarah Louise into her crib to then go downstairs for a few minutes and watch television, when suddenly she heard a loud thud upstairs. It was noise like furniture shaking in the girl's room. Desperate, she ran upstairs thinking the crib had tipped over. Upon arriving, she noticed terrified that she could not open the door to the room. But it wasn't that it was locked. It seemed as if someone from inside was holding it with force. Meanwhile, inside the room, very loud thuds mixed with the baby's crying could be heard. In a panic, she ran out of the house to ask the neighbors for help. And when they finally managed to enter, the noises suddenly ceased. They found little Sarah Louise in her crib, but the room was ice cold, so much so that you could see your breath. There was no one else there. But the sensation of an unsettling presence was undeniable. From that moment, the entire family accepted that something paranormal was happening. Seized by fear but determined to face the situation, they gathered in the kitchen to decide what to do. Some suspected a case of frogging, that is, that perhaps there could be an intruder living and hiding in the house, something that might sound strange, but is more common than you think. In fact, we have an entire video talking about cases like that. With this in mind, Michael picked up the phone to call the police, and at that very instant, the phenomena appeared again. The temperature of the environment plummeted. The phone went dead. The line seemed to have been mysteriously cut, and immediately after, they heard a loud crash in the adjoining living room. Upon running to see what it was about, they found a picture frame of the baby shattered on the floor, as if someone had thrown it with fury. Before they could even react, another silver frame was sent, flying from the shelf by an invisible force before their eyes, smashing against the wall. That was already too much, and amidst screams and prayers, they fled the house in terror that night, getting into the car and driving 140 kilometers to the city of Waterford to take refuge with relatives. Upon returning to Galway, the family sought help from specialists. They resorted to priests of the Catholic Church, and the Bishop of Galway himself, Monsignor Michael Brownie, agreed to bless the home and celebrate an exorcism mass on the 6th of May 1997. The local press soon echoed this poltergeist, and the expectation in the neighborhood was such that dozens of neighbors prayed the rosary outside while the mass took place. Although the bishop only allowed the family to be inside, what followed seems extracted from a movie like The Conjuring. In the middle of the mass, while the bishop was praying in the living room together with the family, the cries of a baby began to be heard coming from Sarah Louise's bedroom on the upper floor. The thing is, the baby at that moment was in her mother's arms with the family in plain view of everyone. The sobbing continued to resonate upstairs, becoming increasingly intense, turning into anguished and almost inhuman wails. The bishop, sweating and visibly disturbed, interrupted his prayers for an instant upon hearing that, but then decided to continue. After finishing the mass, when Jackie asked him in desperation, "What can we do? What was that?" the clergyman only replied, "I didn't hear anything. There is no human explanation for this." After that, he left hurriedly, refusing to discuss the subject further. The family was left even more uneasy. Not even the religious intervention had calmed the poltergeist. On the contrary, that spectral cry of that invisible baby was for them the confirmation that they were dealing with something powerful and evil. Desperate, they then went to a parapsychologist and medium named Sandra Ramdani, known in Ireland for her work as a ghost hunter. Sandra filled the house with a pleasant scent of incense, placed crystals in the rooms, and assured that she felt a spiritual presence in pain. According to the psychic, the origin of the phenomenon was the spirit of a ghost baby, jealous of the attention the little Sarah Louise was receiving. Sandra described some visions she had allegedly had. She recounted that before the Corrib Park houses were built, on that site there was a farm where a young woman lived who was a nun and had become pregnant in secret, supposedly by an influential clergyman. She had to bear witness as the bishop made the newborn disappear to avoid the scandal, murdering and burying it right there. According to her, this would explain the strange and terrifying phenomena they were experiencing in that house. However, according to the medium herself, This story was mentally suggested by the entity, and there was a possibility that it was a deception of the entity itself to manipulate them. In cases of poltergeists, experts warn, many times it is not the soul of a deceased person, but something darker, a non-human entity that feeds on fear and can deceive. The truth is that after the intervention of the medium and the bishop, the episodes diminished little by little. There were some more manifestations, but nothing comparable to what they had experienced before. With time, the house recovered its calm, and the family was able to live in peace again without fully understanding what it was that had really happened there and why. The British program Strange But True dedicated an episode to the case in October of that same year. The Fayan family never sought to profit from the story, and in fact, they moved shortly after, overwhelmed by the media attention. Thus, this case remained as one of the most intriguing paranormal files in Ireland, and without a doubt, the family will never be able to forget what they experienced that spring of 1997, the assassination of Gianni Versace. Now we travel to the United States, to the 15th of July 1997, when the world of fashion and pop culture was shocked by a crime as violent as it was unexpected. The renowned Italian designer Gianni Versace, 50 years old, was shot to death at the door of his mansion in Miami Beach. Versace, founder of one of the most influential fashion houses of the time, was returning from his morning walk along Ocean Drive. He had gone, as almost every day, to have coffee and buy magazines when, upon arriving at the gates of his luxurious Villa Casuarina, around 8:45 inches the morning, an individual approached him from behind and fired 2 shots at point-blank range. One bullet hit him in the neck and another in the head, causing his death almost immediately. Antonio D'Amico, Versace's partner, heard the shots from inside the house and ran to the entrance to find Gianni dying on the ground in a pool of blood while the attacker escaped running. Versace was taken to the hospital, but there was nothing to do. Officially, he was declared dead. The assassination of Versace did not take long to occupy headlines all over the planet, and not only because of the celebrity of the victim, but because the identity of his assassin soon became known. It was a fugitive serial killer who appeared on the FBI's list of most wanted criminals. The aggressor was identified as Andrew Philip Cunanan, a 27-year-old young man originally from California, who in the preceding months had perpetrated a bloody string of deaths. Cunanan was accused of at least 4 homicides committed between April and May of 1997. He had killed a former friend of his in Minnesota, an ex-boyfriend in Chicago, Lee Miglin, a wealthy businessman also in Chicago, and a cemetery caretaker in New Jersey, stealing the latter's car to be able to move around. These crimes made him a fugitive at the national level and caused him to enter the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. But astonishingly, he managed to reach Miami and remained there for weeks without being captured. In fact, there were reports that Cunanan had been seen in several gay clubs in Miami Beach and had even stayed in a cheap motel in the area in the days leading up to the attack, but primarily due to failures in police coordination, he was not stopped in time. The negligence or bad fortune in his search allowed him to remain free. And so, on the sunny morning of July 15, Cunanan had the opportunity to come face-to-face with Gianni Versace. This was in front of his residence, and thus he committed his most famous crime. But why did he murder this man? Why specifically Versace? And this is the great mystery that this case left behind. Officially, it could never be determined what the exact motive was that led Andrew Cunanan to choose the designer as his victim. As far as is known, Versace and Cunanan did not know each other personally, although there are unconfirmed versions that at some point they had crossed paths briefly at a social event in San Francisco. One theory suggests that Cunanan, cornered by the authorities, wanted to say goodbye to the world by committing an act that would ensure him eternal notoriety by murdering someone famous. According to this line of thought, the young man knew his days of freedom were numbered and decided to add a 5th high-profile murder so that his name would remain inscribed in criminal history. Another theory suggested it could have been an attack ordered by the Italian mafia due to supposed debts or shady business of Gianni's. This idea was based on picturesque details, such as that next to Versace's body a dead white dove was found, which some interpreted as a mafia message. However, no solid evidence of a plot was ever found, and the Versace family flatly denied all these allegations. The official investigation focused more on the psychology and history of Cunanan to try to understand his motive. He had been an intelligent young man, but with mythomaniacal tendencies. He frequented high-level homosexual environments, and after contracting HIV, as is believed, he entered a destructive spiral. His first 2 murders were of people he knew intimately, which suggested a personal or passionate component. After that, he killed the magnate Miglin, presumably to steal resources from him, and the caretaker Reese, solely to change vehicles and avoid detection. Versace would have been, then, a symbolic victim someone Cunanan possibly admired or envied, or whose fame represented that which he could never have. However, we will never be able to know Andrew Cunanan's own version, because the outcome of this story prevented him from being interrogated. The hunt for the assassin after Versace's death was intense but brief. For 8 days, Miami Beach was full of armed patrols looking for him, and finally, on the 23rd of July 1997, the police received a tip that someone looking like Cunanan was hiding in a houseboat anchored in a local marina. The authorities quickly surrounded the place and urged him to surrender. But as an answer, Andrew committed suicide by a shot to the head using the same gun with which he had murdered Versace. That is how his life ended, and with it, any possibility of clarifying his true motivation. And that is because he didn't even leave a message or final note. All this made the assassination of Gianni Versace remain another one of the great mysteries, and not only of 1997, but of modern history, the Heaven's Gate case. And so we return to the month of March, 1997. Only 3 days after the macabre discovery of the bodies of the Order of the Solar Temple in Canada, the United States faced its own cult story. In a rented mansion on a ranch in Santa Fe, an affluent suburb in San Diego, California, the police found on March 26 the lifeless bodies of 39 people. They were 21 women and 18 men who had committed a collective suicide. The bodies were all dressed identically. They wore loose, dark clothing. They were wearing new Nike sneakers of the same color, and armbands on which could be read, Heaven's Gate Away Team. There were no signs of violence. They were lying down peacefully, many covered with purple cloths over their faces. The scene was chillingly orderly and clean. Soon, authorities and the media confirmed the unthinkable. Those 39 people were members of the Heaven's Gate sect and were convinced that this way they would abandon their earthly containers, that is, their bodies, to ascend to a spaceship hidden in the Hale-Bopp comet. Heaven's Gate was a New Age religious group with UFO beliefs, led by Marshall Herff Applewhite, a 65-year-old man who claimed to be called Do. This cult went back decades. Applewhite and his colleague, Bonnie Nettles, who was known as T, had founded it in the 1970s, predicting that humans could evolve into a next spiritual and physical level, abandoning their bodies and ascending to a higher plane, sometimes described as a kind of celestial extraterrestrial kingdom. Applewhite taught that he was a divine messenger, a reincarnation of Jesus combined with an alien being music, and that his followers had to renounce all their worldly attachments to graduate thus to that next level. The cult promoted absolute celibacy. Applewhite even persuaded several men to undergo chemical castration to curb their impulses, including himself. Each new member adopted a new name ending in Odi, disassociating themselves from their families and practicing a quasi-military discipline while waiting for a sign from the sky. That sign apparently arrived in 1995 with the discovery of the Hale-Bopp comet, whose approach to Earth would be in March 1997. Applewhite became obsessed with this comet, convinced that it was the prophesied key. According to him, behind the comet was traveling a spaceship invisible to humans, in which superior beings awaited them to take them literally to the kingdom of heaven. At the end of '96, the group, composed of 40 members, mostly middle-aged adults, rented the mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, which they called the monastery, or the ship. There, they recorded videos in which Applewhite and his disciples expressed with surprising serenity their decision to evacuate the Earth to evolve. Subsequently, they sent these videos in farewell packages to members of the sect all over the country. They prepared everything without attracting the attention of neighbors, and as the comet approached, Applewhite indicated that it was time for the departure. Between March 22 and 26, 1997, in a staggered process, the members of Heaven's Gate consummated their final plan. They ingested in turns a lethal cocktail of phenobarbital, mixed with applesauce or apple pudding, accompanied by vodka. After swallowing the dose, each group lay down orderly on bunk beds or mattresses, and other companions took care of covering their heads with a purple cloth once that ritual was evidenced, because the last members, including Applewhite himself, were found uncovered, which indicates that there was no one left to cover them. Many also wore nylon bags around their necks. It is believed that after ingesting the poison, they put the bags on to accelerate the process and removed them in the final moments. The synchronization was such that when the police broke in, alerted by a former member who had received one of the farewell packages, they found the 39 aligned, all in the same conditions, and without signs of a struggle. This was the largest mass suicide in United States territory in modern history. After the investigations, it was confirmed that there were no indications of murder or participation by third parties outside the cult. Everything was planned internally. Marshall Applewhite, along with his followers, thus closing the history of the sect. Bonnie Nettles, the co-founder, had died of cancer in 1985, a loss that Applewhite had to rationalize before his disciples by saying that she ascended without her bodily vehicle. Perhaps in 1997, Marshall felt that it was his last opportunity to legitimize his prophecy, leading them all to the promised ascension. Already in 1975, they had waited in vain for a ship that never arrived, and on this occasion, they decided to provoke that transcendental journey themselves through suicide. Something that draws a lot of attention about the Heaven's Gate cult is that, unlike other sects, it seems the leaders really believed their own words, and their adherents were extremely faithful. None of the 39 wavered in the final moment. There were even members who years earlier had left the sect and who later expressed feeling regret for not having been with their companions at that final moment. In the videos prior to the suicide, the members of Heaven's Gate appear surprisingly smiling, saying goodbye to their families, and even joking. Something curious and somewhat disturbing is that the official page of the sect is still active, although it has not been updated since 1997, leaving us an unsettling digital time capsule. And it is that, among other things, on the page one can still read about the arrival of the comet, and there is even a section where they talk about their position regarding the suicide. As with the Order of the Solar Temple, here the mystery lies more in what leads people to commit this type of act as a quite twisted display of their extreme faith. The death of Princess Diana. Now let's go to the early morning of the 31st of August 1997, to the scene of one of the most talked about deaths in modern history, a case that has generated as much commotion as conspiracy theories. We are talking, of course, about the death of Princess Diana of Wales. Diana Spencer, 36 years old, known worldwide for her charisma and for being the people's princess after her marriage and subsequent divorce from Prince Charles, died in a violent car accident in Paris, France, when she was trying to evade the paparazzi. That night, Diana had left the Ritz Hotel in Paris shortly after midnight, accompanied by her boyfriend Dodi Al-Fayed and his bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones. They climbed into a black Mercedes-Benz driven by Henri Paul, the hotel's head of security, with the intention of heading to Dodi's private apartment. Upon leaving the hotel, several paparazzi aboard motorcycles and automobiles undertook a pursuit to photograph them. Minutes later, after entering the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, at a speed exceeding 100 kilometers per hour, the Mercedes lost control and crashed brutally into one of the concrete pillars of the tunnel. Dodi Al-Fayed and the driver Henri Paul died at the scene, while Diana, gravely wounded, was rescued still with vital signs. They performed resuscitation maneuvers at the spot, and subsequently she was rushed to the Pitié Salpêtrière hospital. But unfortunately, her internal injuries, especially a massive hemorrhage caused by a rupture of a pulmonary vein, proved fatal. At 4:00 a.m. that August 31, she was officially declared dead by cardiac arrest, unleashing a wave of grief and disbelief around the world. The only survivor of this accident was Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard, who was traveling in the front seat with his seatbelt on. He suffered very grave injuries but survived to relate fragments of what happened. Neither Diana nor Dodi were wearing seatbelts at that moment. What followed this tragedy was a phenomenon rarely seen. A global mourning, without precedent, accompanied almost immediately by a torrent of speculation. Millions of people refused to accept that Diana had died in something as apparently mundane as a traffic accident. Both the French investigation concluded in 1999 and an exhaustive investigation by the Metropolitan Police of London that began in 2004 and concluded in 2006 agreed that there was no crime or provable plot. According to these inquiries, the cause of the accident was the reckless driving of Henri Paul, who presented a level of alcohol in the blood 3 times higher than the legal limit and also had ingested antidepressant medications. All this added to the speeding to try to leave the paparazzi behind. The Mercedes entered the tunnel at great speed, and Paul lost control upon dodging or running into a white Fiat Uno that was circulating through the area. That vehicle and its driver were never identified, which opened the door to a large quantity of theories and speculations, which were not limited only to the public, because Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, affirmed publicly on multiple occasions that Diana and his son had been victims of an assassination orchestrated by British Secret Services under orders from the royal family. According to Al-Fayed, Prince Philip, husband of Queen Elizabeth II, could not tolerate the idea that Diana, mother of the future king, Prince William, could marry Dodi, a Muslim man of Egyptian origin. This displeasure, he assured, would have increased upon learning of Diana's supposed pregnancy. Al-Fayed maintained that Diana had confessed to his son that she was pregnant and that they planned to announce their engagement shortly, something the official investigation debunked. However, the credibility of the authorities has always been questioned in this case, because in the end, it involves people with enormous power and influence. In 2008, during a judicial investigation in London, Al-Fayed went as far as to affirm that the supposed plot was in charge of Prince Philip, Prince Charles, the then Prime Minister Tony Blair, the CIA, the British MI6, and even Diana's sister, among others. Other popular theories maintain that Henri Paul was an MI6 informant and that he deliberately crashed the vehicle. It was also said that the mysterious Fiat Uno belonged to a secret agent, and that a flash of intense light blinded the driver of the Mercedes inside the tunnel. Some witnesses claimed to have seen said flash, while others claimed not to have noticed anything out of the ordinary. A fact that turns out to be inarguably suspicious is that no security camera recorded this accident, despite there being several at the tunnel's access points. The authorities explained that these cameras did not point directly to the scene of the crash and that they did not record video, but fixed photographs that did not turn out to be useful. There were really many irregularities and questions that the entire world asked, such as, for example, why did the ambulance take so long to transport Diana to the hospital? Why was the body embalmed that same night? In France, it is prioritized to stabilize the patient before transporting them, and it was explained that the ambulance moved slowly because Diana was extremely delicate during the journey. And as for the embalming, French law required it due to the summer heat and the time it would take to repatriate the body, although this complicated subsequent pregnancy test something that for many turned out to be suspicious. In 2013, Scotland Yard examined a final allegation made by a former British soldier who claimed that the SAS, the Special Forces, was involved in this event. After investigating it, the police concluded that there was no credible evidence and that the case did not have to be reopened. Lady Di, due to her charisma and closeness to people, had become a world icon, a figure almost from a fairy tale. Her tragic end transformed her then into a legend. Perhaps that is why conspiracy theories persist even to this day, because it is hard to accept that someone like her would die in such a common accident, or perhaps because, deep down, many believe that the complete truth will never be revealed. And so we close this video. Please, tell us in the comments if you would like to know more mysteries from a particular year, because we are going to be reading to choose the next one. Tell us what you thought of these cases, and thank you for reaching this part of the video. Remember that a comment and a like helps us a lot to reach more people. Thank you for following us on social media, and thank you for being on the lookout for our channel. We love you very much. Without more to say, I say goodbye. See you later.